Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Emily Sophia, aka Mighty Sophia, here to break down for you guys the latest episode of Bates Motel. We are currently on Season 5, Episode 3, Bad Blood. So, spoiler alert, before I dive into the mad thick of things, as I shall be endeavoring to bear all in this review, but of course there are probably certain ideas and details and nuances that I'm going to miss despite how long these reviews are. So I encourage, nay, I implore you guys to bring up anything that I miss or fail to cover in the comments below, because honestly, this video is just the beginning of the conversation. So without further ado, let us get into the nit and the grit as we do on a weekly basis. So, this week's episode was a rather strange beast. I can't say that it was my favorite of the bunch, but we definitely dealt with some much needed stuff involving Caleb. And if you guys have checked out my previous reviews, I have been incredibly vocal about my disdain for the character of Caleb, and I know that quite a few of you are actually fans of him. I say actually, but honestly, it is okay. We can have civil conversation about it. But yeah. Anyway, so he now officially appears to be out of the picture, but of course what I assume is his death is naturally going to be the impetus for probably Dylan and Emma returning to White Pine Bay to discover Norman's increasingly dark misdeeds. And I'll say a lot more about Caleb soon, but we also got to spend a lot of time with Chick, and he has assumed an incredibly fascinating role in the Bates family drama and is in fact stoking the fire of Norman's psychosis for his own personal gain. So in one sense, we can see him as sort of a villainous figure because he is exploiting this situation to craft this true crime novel of his. But at the same time, there's something very genuine about his curiosity and his sensibilities as a storyteller. I mean, heck, I can understand those. I'm a writer myself, so it definitely puts me in an interesting place because I'm like, man, who exactly is friggin' Chick? Like, he is, much like Norma and many of the other characters in the show, an incredibly multifaceted human being who is at once questionable and comical and just utterly endearing. Like, I definitely see him as the type of character that would surface in Twin Peaks. It's been said before, but I just recently finished watching the show, so now I completely understand that, and I would love to see him surface in the return of Twin Peaks, but unfortunately, I think that has already wrapped. But anyways, yeah, what are your thoughts about Chick? Because basically what we see in this episode is the all-consuming appeal and magnetism of Norma. And it's not just this appeal. I mean, that's even too light of a word. She's kind of this Bermuda Triangle into which all men inextricably vanish, including her son Norman, including her brother Caleb, and including Chick, who has found himself interwoven in the family affairs and now realizes that there's even more than meets the eye now that he is in the thick of things and trying to capture this madness in the form of a book. So we see a lot about the ideas of delusion and connection, of fantasy versus reality, and ultimately all the ways in which these disparate men are trying to survive, especially in the aftermath of the wonderful hurricane that is Norma Bates. And it's just so it's really cool to see the dynamic now that Norman as Norma as mother shares with this little community of chaotic characters. But at the same time, I was just like, there was also part of me that was like, man, this is so weird. There's just too many friggin' people. And I was a little bit irked that Caleb ultimately started sharing in the delusion that we have always prescribed exclusively to Norman. But, and I say that knowing full well that I cannot truly see Caleb objectively, and so I'm like, hey, get out of my story with Norman and Norma that I love, you asshole. But that being said, I know that he has been through incredibly traumatic events himself, to the point that a man of his mental, emotional, psychological state would be given to imagining things and to conjuring up Norma in the same, or at least in a similar way to how Norman has. He might not necessarily have the same disorders and upbringing and other medley of circumstances that have helped Norman create the construct of mother, but I understand why they did it. I'm just like, I'm jealous for my Bateses. What can I say? But yeah, so let's walk through all the details of the episode together and kind of hash things out. So of course, we start off the episode with Caleb chained up in the basement, and at the beginning he hears the voice of Norma saying, "Hello, Caleb, how are you feeling?" And she apologizes for hitting him, but of course he knows the secret. And then suddenly that's when Norma's voice morphs into Norman's, and we see that it is him in the blonde wig and the floral dress and heels, which, by the way, I've said it before and I'll say it again, Freddie Highmore rocks it. I'm just saying. But anyway, so Mother insists on knowing why Caleb came, and he immediately realizes what is going on, and he tries to play into Norma / Mother's feelings by talking about Dylan and Emma and Catherine, the granddaughter. So he tries to really play up the familial ties. But honestly, Mother is not having it. And, you know, the long and the short of it is that he knows something that he's not supposed to know. And his fate is up to Norman. And it's super interesting, the power dynamic that we see in this episode. Because in the previous episode, Norman was questioning Mother about whether or not she... I know that he was questioning Mother about her feelings for Romero. I don't remember if they actually spoke about Caleb. I feel like I should remember this. I took notes during the episode. But yeah, so he is kind of, at times we see that he's questioning Mother and her abilities and what she is actually capable of and willing to do. And in this situation, it's interesting how Norman internalized a version of Norma that is vulnerable, or is open to the relationship that she had with Caleb, and despite the pain that he inflicted upon her, she herself cannot bring him to an end. And it's fascinating that Norman kept that part of her intact, and that ultimately that forces Mother to make Norman take the role of the killer, whereas in the past, in almost every other instance, it has been Mother who takes the lead and takes charge when somebody needs to be disposed of. So yeah, I think that was dealt with in a really fascinating way throughout this episode. But anyway, so once Mother comes back up the stairs and finds Chick, she realizes, okay, let's talk about this. You know, you're a good guy. You've been checking in on Norman, but then she asks, like, what is your motive here? Which is a very pertinent question, because as things continue, for as much as there is this sense of camaraderie between Chick and Norman, and by proxy Norma, we see very much that he is taking advantage of the situation, you know, which I can't entirely blame him for. His presence is incredibly entertaining and quirky, as is this show, and so having him in the mix is certainly not unwelcome. It's very suspect, you know, and I like having these characters that we really have to delve into and explore whether or not we sympathize with them, or are they in the right or are they in the wrong, and getting to be on this spectrum with Chick is super cool and super unexpected. I love that he wasn't just abandoned as this goofy side character doing weird stuff and wearing his kimono and looking weird, but instead he ultimately seems to be in the position of bringing about this story that we are witnessing to the rest of the world, you know, whether he is going to release that himself. There's also the question of whether or not he's even going to survive the show, and is he going to publish posthumously as Robert Bloch, who wrote the original Psycho novel. So many theories abound about Chick, and I would certainly love to hear yours. But he's just such a sweet and earnest and affable fellow that as he's like, you know what, I'm not here to judge, I'm just here to observe and hang out and make sure the house isn't burned down, because that's not going to be so good for my novel. And so it's at once there is this altruism and this self-serving nature in Chick that I think is at the end of the day, it's understandable. I get it. It's profoundly problematic, sure. But I mean, if you were in his position, what would you do? That's not necessarily the point of television, to ask, like, what would you do in that situation? But at the same time, it's like being presented with this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and wanting to, you know, realizing that the truth really is stranger than fiction. So if you want to craft the strangest and thereby the best fiction, arguably, you gotta stick around and watch what happens. But of course, Chick is also kind of leaving his mark as well, so he's not just watching from afar. He is in the thick of it and partaking in the Bates family crimes by enabling Norman's behavior and playing into the delusion such that he can sustain it for his own purposes. But anyways, I could talk about this the entire video. So anyways, Mother acquiesces to the idea of Chick's temporary tenancy. He's just a live-in writing resident, if you will. And meanwhile, we see that Romero is getting transferred. Now, I'll go ahead and talk about the Romero stuff pretty quick, because he gets all these scenes that are interspersed throughout the episode. I wasn't actually expecting that he was going to make a break for it this early on in the season, but now he's got a bit of a flesh wound in his tummy, so it appears that he's going to be kind of out of the action a little bit again. I don't know if he's going to be able to stick around at this farmhouse with the kid who shot him in the gut, but, you know, that's just, there's not a ton to say about it at this point, other than, I mean, we do kind of get to see the sides of Romero that we've come to know. There is this duplicitousness, duplicity, I can't talk. I don't know if I'm making words that are more confusing than they need to be, but, you know, duplicitous. He can at once be a caring and reassuring man, but also a cold-blooded criminal who is hell-bent on getting revenge at this point. So I guess he's not so much cold-blooded as he is hot-blooded, hot-headed, but nevertheless, the way that he treats the guy whose car he jacked and tries to reassure the kid at the farm, like, he's not, like, Satan, you know? He's a pretty okay dude. but he's got a lot of issues, and Norman is one of them. And he commits a lot of atrocities in the name of getting what is his, and avenging Norma, of course. In the same manila envelope that he's keeping his handgun, he also has Norma's ring, like he's trying to remind himself of what is driving him on this path. But yeah, so he tries to play it cool, but turns out that the kid on the farm is thrown off by his how well dressed he is for a hiker, and you know, Nestor Carbonell's is that his name? Nestor, I know at least. But he's got those bushy eyelashes, you know, they're very beguiling, very frightening, you know, to encounter in the middle of the night on your property. So, yep, he gets shot. He's not gone. Don't worry about it. He'll be back, of course. I definitely think that he's still going to be part of the end game, so don't get your panties in a knot. We'll be back to him. But anyways, so yeah, we are weaving in and out of a lot of Norman's blackouts this week, and every single time Mother comes to greet Norman, and in the first instance she apologizes for the erratic behavior at the restaurant and offers to bring him some food while he stays in bed, and that's actually the point at which Chick makes his entrance, and it seems like he's going to kind of skirt over the surface of things, but he actually reveals that, yeah, he met Mother, but also it's totally cool, and they're gonna be best buds, and and he says a line that I kind of liked, we're all in this sideshow together, and then we die. It makes me think of I think the title of the first episode of the show was First You Dream, Then You Die, something to that effect. You can correct me in the comments, I'm not looking it up right now. But anyways, so now we're getting into the Caleb business, and we see a flashback to Caleb in Norma's childhood as Caleb slowly comes around. And we hear the shouting of their parents and how they're locked in their room, and at this point they're still just kids. They're and all they really have is each other, and that's what Norma says, like, clearly they're gonna be okay if they have one another to cling to. But anyway, so once Caleb is up and at him, he begs Chick to be freed from his prison, but Chick insists that he's only an observer, of course, as the author here, and he lacks the authority to act in the situation. He wants things to unfold as organically as possible. Such a man of integrity. He just wants the characters to take charge and do exactly what they're going to do, and he will capture it all. But anyways, as far as Chick is concerned, his fate, Caleb's fate, belongs solely to Norman. And he expresses some lackluster sympathy for Caleb's plight as he returns upstairs. And then he comes back with some grub and seeks an audience with the jailbird. And he asks to know more about Norma and Caleb's history with her. And he definitely brings up the rape stuff. And it is not denied that Caleb inflicted that abuse upon her, but he, at this point, doesn't want to talk about it. He is evidently in no place to own up to where their relationship went awry and where he began to exploit her and push her into territory that was uncomfortable and unsafe for her. But yeah, so we get a lot of insight into their abuse at the hands of their parents, into Norma getting up and leaving with somebody from high school, and Chick asks point blank if it was because he was raping her, but Caleb just can't deal with it. He can't talk about that, even now that he's on death's door. And I still find that deeply disturbing and freaky, but of course he immediately goes back into these warmer recollections of his sister, like the intensity of her gaze and how she could just stare at somebody until it looked like like they were gonna explode, and that's definitely something I'd see from Vera Farmiga, of course. But you know, he doesn't want to talk about it. Doesn't want to talk about where things went wrong, and that to me is more telling. But I know that it's a deeply tragic situation for many, and if I could feel more, I would. But I am a cold, embittered soul, evidently. So. We also get a fun little moment of sass with Norma sitting in on one of Norman and Chick's conversations when Norman walks in on Chick cleaning up a broken picture, and she blames the incident on his attire and the kimono, and Chick's like, yeah, that's not the first time I've gotten burned for that, so it's all good. And then the three of them proceed to have dinner with each other, courtesy of Chick's Taiwanese cooking skills. This guy is definitely a denizen of multicultural fare. Certainly the writerly type, if I ever saw one. So yeah, he tries to further endear himself to the unlikely pair by explaining that he can be useful and discreet. And Norma says, yeah, I mean, I do want to get my window fixed. And Norma doesn't say anything and expects Chick to have heard her, which is interesting. But there is some part of his brain that seems to understand that Norma is exclusively in his head, so he does decide to pass on the message for her rather than dispensing his rage or trying to call Chick out as some kind of charlatan or something like that. But yeah, so it's a very, very tenuous, very unsettling situation. We see that he's got the tape recorder and all that good jazz, but at the same time, there's something very jovial about the whole affair. And it's kind of nice to have Chick around to smooth things over and to just be so accepting and par for the course, and Mother's down with him. She approves of this man thus far. Now we do get a little scene with Madeline Loomis, who wastes no time in, after bringing the delicious chocolate chip cookies that Chick jumps on, explaining that her marriage is essentially falling apart. And she goes from like, yeah, I just wanted to apologize for the whole thing. My life is in total shambles. Want to hang out even though I'm married? It's going to be super cool. I think I kind of like you. And it all just like, it all comes out in a matter of like 30 seconds. And I love the camera's focus on Norman. It just lingers on his face and how he looks at Madeline so longingly, reflecting on these traits of hers that are reminiscent of Norma, of course. And I mean, who can blame the guy? Who can blame him? It is all laid out before him, and they actually get to go on a walk together, and it's really sad because later when Mother demands that that Norman do her dirty work, he resists on the grounds that he actually got to have a nice, normal experience with another female person. Which Mother actually doesn't pry into that at the time. But yeah, it really is sad that he sees this woman who reminds him of the good times that he had with Norma. And so when Mother comes at him, just ready for him to commit murder on her behalf, well, it's a task he's not exactly inclined to take care of, but nevertheless, he is indeed his mother's son, so ultimately he goes to deal with that. Now, we do get a super interesting scene, a few interesting scenes with Caleb as he has this dream about finding Norma alive in the cold storage throne room, and she is just bathed in the golden light in which Norman usually sees her, and she's tending to her flowers and embraces him, but then he feels her go limp, and he wakes up, and he screams, and everything's terrible, and then this is the point at which Chick explains the situation to Norman that his mother hid from him. And he is absolutely distraught and beside himself. And Norman goes down into the basement. We think he's going as himself, but watch Freddie Highmore's face, because you can glimpse that transition in to Mother that he takes. And oh man, there is this crazy scene of Norman embodying Norma, and Caleb getting to have this this last moment with her, and there is so much to unpack in this situation. This is later, soon afterwards is when Mother is like, you've got to do this thing. I can't do it. Like, he's dangerous. It's not going to work. Even though Norma, who Caleb was willing to see as Norma, was like, we'll just be together. It's all going to be good. So there is this duality to both Norman and the construct of Norma in his mind. Now, Mother is a far more proficient and successful killer than is Norman. So Norman sets Caleb free in a flurry and chases him out under gunfire. And then Mother joins in the fray. And then Chick comes in, and he actually is the one who ends up hitting the guy. So this is probably a twist that he did not expect to take while doing his literary research, and it's certainly going to complicate family affairs even further. But yeah, this was ultimately a really fascinating episode. Each and every one in the season has been. Probably not my favorite, but moved a lot of things forward in a meaningful way. There's so much more I want to talk about, but I gotta go. This review has gotten so long. So I love you guys. Thank you so much in advance for leaving all of your thoughts. We'll hash it out together. I will try my best to respond to comments this week. And yeah, I'll be back with a Logan review super soon, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, take care of yourselves. And as always, I will be back before you know it.